For nearly 700 years, Japan was ruled not by emperors, but by military commanders, men who wielded power from the shadows, their will enforced by thousands of loyal samurai. They were called shoguns. This is the complete history of the shogunate. The story of the shogunate begins in the Heian period, a time when Japan was ruled by an imperial court centered in Kyoto. Kyoto's nobility immersed themselves in art, literature, and courtly rituals, believing themselves to be the true rulers of the land. But beyond the walls of their palaces, a very different Japan was taking shape. The countryside was restless, bandits roamed unchecked, feudal lords, known as daimyo, squabbled over land, and taxation disputes turned violent. The emperor's court, preoccupied with poetry and politics, had little control over the distant provinces. To survive, powerful noble families began relying on warriors to protect their estates. These warriors, known as samurai, were more than just hired swords. They lived by a strict code of honor and duty, later known as bushido. Mastering the art of war, the samurai became the enforcers of order, loyal not to the emperor, but to those who could reward their service. As their power grew, two mighty clans emerged to dominate the battlefield, the Taira and the Minamoto. Their rivalry was not just political, it was deeply personal, fueled by betrayals, ambition, and centuries of bloodshed. By the late 12th century, this feud would erupt into the Genpei War, a brutal conflict that would not only decide the fate of these clans, but reshape Japan's future forever. The Genpei War, 1180 to 1185, was more than just a struggle for power. It was the final reckoning between the Taira and Minamoto clans. In the war's decisive battle at Dan no Ura, Minamoto no Yoritomo's forces annihilated the Taira, driving them to their doom in the turbulent waters of the Shimonoseki Strait. It was a victory drenched in blood, but one that would change Japan forever. Yoritomo, now the undisputed ruler of Japan, recognized a critical truth. The emperor was weak, a mere puppet of aristocratic factions. The true power lay not in Kyoto's imperial court, but in the hands of those who could command armies. In 1292, he took the title of shogun, establishing the Kamakura Shogunate, Japan's first military government. The emperor remained on the throne, but his authority was reduced to ceremonial duties. From this moment on, Japan would be ruled not by divine decree, but by the sword. However, power is never secure. Yoritomo's rule, though transformative, was brief. After his death in 1199, his family struggled to maintain control, and the real authority soon fell to the Hojo clan, who ruled from behind the scenes as regents, manipulating successive shoguns like pieces on a chessboard. But the greatest test was yet to come. From across the sea, the Mongol Empire, the largest the world had ever seen, set its sights on Japan. The storm was coming. By the late 13th century, the Mongol Empire was an unstoppable force, having conquered China, Korea, and vast territories across Eurasia. Kublai Khan, the formidable ruler of the empire, demanded Japan's submission. When the Kamakura Shogunate refused, he sent his armies to claim the island nation by force. The first invasion came in 1274. Thousands of Mongol, Chinese, and Korean soldiers landed on Kyushu, bringing with them a terrifying new style of warfare, organized formations, powerful long-range bows, and explosive gunpowder weapons never before seen by the samurai. The Japanese fought fiercely, but just as defeat seemed inevitable, a powerful typhoon struck, tearing through the Mongol fleet and forcing a retreat. Kublai Khan was undeterred. In 1281, he launched an even larger invasion, this time with over 140,000 troops, one of the largest naval armadas in history. Once again, the samurai stood their ground, battling against overwhelming odds. And once again, nature intervened. A second catastrophic typhoon, later called the kamikaze or divine wind, obliterated the Mongol fleet, saving Japan from conquest. But victory came at a cost. The war effort had drained the Kamakura Shogunate's treasury, and the samurai, who had fought valiantly, were left unrewarded. Discontent spread like wildfire, and loyalty to the shogunate crumbled. In 1333, the long-weakened regime finally collapsed. Ashikaga Takauji, a powerful general, turned against the Kamakura rulers, siding with Emperor Go-Daigo's rebellion. The imperial forces stormed Kamakura, slaughtering the last defenders. With the city in flames, the Kamakura Shogunate, Japan's first military government, was no more. But from the ashes of one shogunate, another would rise, and this time its rule would be even more fragile. The fall of the Kamakura Shogunate left Japan in turmoil. In 1336, Ashikaga Takauji, once a loyal general of the imperial court, betrayed Emperor Go-Daigo and seized power for himself. Declaring a new military government, he established the Ashikaga Shogunate, ruling from Kyoto. But unlike the iron-fisted Kamakura rule, the Ashikaga Shogunate was weak from the start. Instead of a centralized authority, power gradually slipped into the hands of regional warlords, the daimyo, who commanded vast private armies and ruled their territories like independent kingdoms. The Ashikaga shoguns were often mere figureheads, struggling to control their increasingly defiant vassals. By the 15th century, Japan had spiraled into complete anarchy. This was the beginning of the Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period, an era of unrelenting conflict where daimyo fought for supremacy, alliances shifted overnight, and betrayal was a way of life. Castles burned, samurai clans were wiped out, and Kyoto itself became a battlefield. No one was safe, and no ruler was secure. For over a century, Japan remained locked in this brutal struggle, but in the midst of the chaos, three extraordinary men would rise, three warriors who would defy fate, crush their enemies, and forge a new Japan. After more than a century of chaos, one man rose above the endless war, Oda Nobunaga. A military genius and ruthless strategist, he vowed to bring Japan under one rule, no matter the cost. He revolutionized warfare, embracing firearms and European tactics, crushing his enemies with unmatched brutality. Even the powerful Buddhist warrior monks, who had long held influence over politics and war, fell before his armies. But in 1582, just as his conquest neared completion, treachery struck. Betrayed by his own general, Akechi Mitsuhide, Nobunaga was forced to commit seppuku as his castle burned around him. Yet his vision did not die. His most loyal general, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, seized power and avenged his fallen master. A brilliant diplomat and cunning tactician, Hideyoshi did what no one before him had done. By 1590, he unified all of Japan. But fate was cruel. He died in 1598, leaving behind a fragile rule and an infant son too young to command the loyalty of warlords. The power vacuum he left behind would spark one final battle for dominance. That battle came in 1600 at Sekigahara, the greatest and most decisive conflict in Japan's history. On one side stood Tokugawa Ieyasu, a patient and calculating leader who had spent decades building his influence. On the other, a coalition of rivals desperate to stop him. When the dust settled, Ieyasu stood victorious. In 1603, he was officially declared shogun, ushering in the Tokugawa Shogunate, a dynasty that would rule Japan for over 250 years, bringing an era of peace unlike anything Japan had ever known. But peace would not last forever. The seeds of change had already been planted, and the rise of the modern world would spell the end of the samurai's rule. With Tokugawa Ieyasu's victory, Japan entered a new age, one not of war, but of control. The Tokugawa Shogunate established a strict, centralized government, moving the capital to Edo, modern-day Tokyo, and enforcing a rigid social order. The samurai, once fierce warriors, became bureaucrats and administrators, serving their lords in peacetime. Farmers, merchants, and artisans all had their designated places in society, bound by rules that dictated everything from clothing to occupation. Perhaps the most defining policy of this era was Sakoku, Japan's self-imposed isolation. In 1639, the shogunate closed the country to nearly all foreign influence, fearing the spread of Christianity and potential European conquest. Only a handful of Dutch and Chinese traders were allowed to operate from the island of Dejima in Nagasaki, offering Japan a narrow window into the outside world. Yet despite isolation, the Edo period saw an explosion of culture and prosperity. Cities thrived, art flourished, and the economy boomed. Theaters showcased the rise of kabuki, poets refined haiku, and the famous ukiyo-e woodblock prints depicted the beauty of Japan's landscapes and everyday life. But no wall lasts forever. By the 19th century, the world had changed. Industrialized nations were expanding, empires were rising, and Japan's isolation became increasingly unsustainable. The cracks in the Tokugawa order were growing. Soon, foreign ships would arrive, demanding that Japan open its doors to the world. The age of the samurai was nearing its final chapter. For over 2 centuries, Japan had remained isolated, untouched by the rapid changes sweeping the world. But in 1853, that illusion was shattered. Commodore Matthew Perry, commanding a fleet of black steam-powered warships, arrived in Edo Bay, demanding that Japan open its ports to foreign trade. The Tokugawa government, unprepared for modern warfare, had no choice but to comply. In 1854, Japan signed the first of several unequal treaties, granting Western nations special privileges, while humiliating the once mighty samurai class. The shock of foreign intrusion destabilized the already weakening shogunate. Samurai, frustrated by their leader's failure to defend Japan's sovereignty, rose in rebellion. The call for Sono Joy, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, spread like wildfire, igniting tensions between the ruling shogunate and those loyal to the emperor. By 1868, this conflict erupted into open war. Forces supporting Emperor Meiji launched the Boshin War, a nationwide struggle to overthrow the shogunate. Samurai loyalists fought fiercely, but the Tokugawa government, outmatched and losing support, crumbled. The final blow came when imperial forces captured Edo Castle, the seat of shogunal power. With that, the era of the shoguns ended. The emperor was restored to power, and Japan embarked on an unprecedented transformation. The Meiji Restoration. The country rapidly industrialized, adopted Western technology, and abandoned the samurai class in favor of a modern, centralized military. In less than a generation, Japan had gone from a feudal state to an emerging global power. The shogunate had ruled Japan for nearly 700 years, shaping its history through war, governance, and isolation. But now, the age of the samurai was over, and a new Japan was about to rise. Though the shogunate is long gone, its impact on Japan is undeniable. The centuries of samurai rule left behind more than just castles and relics. They shaped the very spirit of the nation. The values of discipline, loyalty, and honor that define the samurai still resonate in modern Japan, reflected in everything from martial arts to corporate culture. The traditions forged during the Edo period, from tea ceremonies to sumo wrestling, continue to thrive. The towering castles that once housed warlords now stand as symbols of Japan's rich history. Even the capital, Tokyo, was once Edo, the very heart of the Tokugawa Shogunate. For nearly 700 years, Japan was ruled not by emperors, but by shoguns, military leaders who shaped the course of its destiny. Though the age of the samurai has ended, its echoes remain, woven into the fabric of a nation that has never forgotten its past. Like and subscribe for more deep dives into history.